Today we're doing chapter 6.5, which is about common denominators and equivalent fractions. Okay, and your learning goal for today is to find a least common denominator and use that to write equivalent fractions. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all those mathematical words mean as we dive into the lesson. But first, let's talk about the problem of the day. It says, Luis is making 2 batches of muffins for a school picnic. One batch of muffins uses 1/4 cups of oats and 2/4 cups of flour. How much oats and flour does Luis need for 2 batches? So all together, if I had to count up all of the oats and all of the flour that Luis needs to make 2 batches, how much does he need? Well, of course, step 1 asks us to find out what the problem is asking. Yarden, what is the problem asking? Right, we're going to figure out how much oats and flour does Luis need for 2 batches. Then, of course, we have to figure out what is the important information we need. Divina? Right. So for each batch, he uses 1/4 cups of oats and 2/4 cups of flour. Step 3 asks us to show how we could solve it. Liam?
There's one more important piece of information. He's making 2 batches.
One more piece of information. He's making 2 batches of muffins. Okay, so how could we solve it? Matthew?
So we can double each number. So like the oats, you multiply that by 2. So 1/4 plus 1/4 would be 2/4. And 2/4 plus 2/4 would be 4/4 or 1.
Okay, so this is the oats.
Yeah.
And then 2/4 plus 2/4 equals 4/4, which also equals 1, and that's the flour. So how much does he need all together?
He would need 1 and 2/4.
So all together he needs 1 and 2/4 cups of oats and flours. An equivalent fraction is a mathematical way of saying different fractions that have the same value. So you can see here in these pictures, and as you're writing down in your notebook this definition, that 1/2 has the same value as how many fourths? 2/4. So 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4, which is also equivalent to how many eighths? 4/8. Okay, so all 3 of these fractions, 1/2, 2/4, and 4/8 are all equivalent. So this chart shows equivalent fractions because, for example, you can see that 1/3 takes up this amount of space. And if I draw a straight line down, I can see also, oh, look, is that equivalent? So I can see that 2/6 are equivalent to 1/3. I could also see, for example, that 1/2 is equivalent to how many fourths?
2.
Which is also equivalent, if I keep drawing my straight line, to 3/6 or 4/8 or 5/10 or 6/12. So I want you to keep this chart inside your notebook so that you can always see what fractions are equivalent to one another. Okay? Okay, so Sarah has 2 gardens, and each garden is 1 acre. One of these gardens had 3 sections of flowers. So you can see right here there's 3 sections of flowers. And the other had 4 sections of flowers. She plans to divide both gardens into more sections. She wants to split up each of those into more sections so that each garden will have the same number of equal-sized gardens. How many sections will each garden have? Well, if I divide, first of all, this garden over here is split into how many sections? 3. So each section is how big of the whole thing? 1/3. This is 1/3, this is 1/3, and this is 1/3. If I divide each of those 1/3 sections into 4 more sections, I have 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Now how many sections total do I have in this garden? Go ahead and draw that in your notebook. How many sections do you have all together? We can use what's called a common denominator or a common multiple of 2 or more denominators that name the same part of a whole. Now, let's talk about this vocabulary word, common denominator. That's a very mathematical term, but if we take it apart into its 2 parts, we can figure out what it means. If 2 things have something in common, what does it mean? They're the same. So common means the same. And what is a denominator? What is the denominator, Daniel?
Bottom number. Like the whole
Yeah. So if I have a fraction, 1/2, the denominator is the total number of pieces, which is 2, or the bottom number of a fraction. So a common denominator, if two fractions have a common denominator, what does that mean? If two fractions have a common denominator, what does that mean? Ashi? Remember how Sarah's garden originally, one of them was divided into thirds, and one of them was divided into fourths, right? So originally she had 1/3 and 1/4. When we divided those two gardens into the same number of sections, how many sections did each garden have? 12. So a common denominator could be 12. So we could rewrite Sarah's 1/3 of her garden, okay, as how many twelfths? Look back at your drawing. When you divided those thirds into twelfths, how many twelfths were there? 1/3 is the same as 4 twelfths. And then when you divided the fourths of a garden into twelfths as well, how many twelfths were there in 1/4? 3 twelfths. So do you see how now 4 twelfths and 3 twelfths are two fractions that have common denominators? Turn and talk to your table group. Why do the fractions 4 twelfths and 3 twelfths have common denominators? Now that we've written each denominator as a product of its prime factors, we can use these prime factors to find the least common multiple. Now let's see, what factor do these two have in common? Okay, they both have 1, 2. So we can do 2. What else do they have in common? Another 2. Okay, so we can circle these two 2's. Now, do they have anything else in common? No, everything that's left over you still have to multiply. So there's a leftover 2. And there's a leftover 5. The ones that have in common, you only need to use them once, but the ones that they don't have in common, you need to multiply. So the least common denominator, or LCD, is going to equal 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. What is 2 times 2? Times 2 times 5? So the LCD is going to be 40. So now we know the least common denominator of both of these fractions is going to be 40. So we need to write equivalent fractions using the lowest common denominator. So we have to say 5/8 is going to be the same as something 40ths, and 7/20ths is going to be the same as something over 40. Okay? So let's think in our heads. What do I have to multiply 8 by to get 40? 5. So if I multiply the denominator by 5, what do I need to do to the top? Okay, so 5 times 5 is 25. So 5/8 is equivalent to 25 40ths. Now let's think about this one. What do I have to multiply 20 by to get to 40? Okay, if I multiply the denominator by 2, I also need to multiply the numerator by 2, right? So 7 times 2 is 14. So I can say that 5/8 is equivalent to 25 40ths, and 7/20ths is equal to 14 40ths. Now I've rewritten both of these fractions as equivalent fractions with a common denominator of 40.